everybody. I'm Sasha Brandon, the program manager at Seattle City of Literature. Thank you so much for joining us. As we begin tonight, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on Indigenous land. Here in Seattle, we're on the traditional unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Duwamish people. We honor their elders past and present and thank them for their stewardship of this land. Welcome to this evening's program with Iona Winter and Sasha LaPointe, moderated by Rena Priest, presented by Seattle City of Literature and Dunedin UNESCO City of Literature, and supported by Seattle's Office of Arts and Culture, the Amazon Literary Partnership, and Seattle University. When Seattle was designated a UNESCO City of Literature back in 2017, we joined a global network of creative cities. There are currently 39 cities of literature around the world, and we're delighted to partner tonight with Dunedin, New Zealand to bring you this program. Both Dunedin and Seattle have amazing Indigenous writers, and we're excited to highlight their work. We'll hear poems from Iona and Sasha, and then they will also appear in conversation moderated with Rena Priest. Iona Winter, Waitaha Katimamoi Kai Tahu, lives in Dunedin, New Zealand. Her hybrid work is widely published in literary journals internationally. Iona creates work to be performed, relishing cross-modality collaboration, and holds a Master's of Creative Writing. She's authored 3 collections, Gaps in the Light from 2021, Tuho Kaika, and Then the Wind Came. Skilled at giving voice to difficult topics, she often draws on her deep connection to land, place, and whenua. Rena Priest, Seweltunat, is a poet and an enrolled member of the Clackamush Lummi Nation. She's been appointed to serve as the Washington State Poet Laureate for the term of April 2021 to 2023. She is a Vaden Foundation Fellow and a recipient of an Allied Arts Foundation Professional Poets Award. Her debut collection, Patriarchy Blues, was published by Moonpath Press and received an American Book Award. She's a National Geographic explorer and a Jack Straw writer, and she holds an MFA from Sarah Lawrence College. But first, we're going to hear from Sasha. Sasha Takshablu LaPointe is a Coast Salish author from the Nooksack and Upper Skagit Indian tribes. She received a double MFA in creative nonfiction and poetry from the Institute of American Indian Arts. She is the author of Red Paint, a memoir which is forthcoming in 2022, and she lives in Tacoma, Washington. Please help me welcome Iona Winter, Rena Priest, and first, Sasha LaPointe. Hi, Sasha.
Thank you for that beautiful introduction and for having me here tonight. This is wonderful. Takshablu Seedsta. I'm Sasha LaPointe. I'm happy to be here, and I'm going to read just 3 poems from a collection, a little zine that I made called Rose Quartz, which has been picked up for publication with Milkweed. So it'll be coming out in 2023. So again, thank you. And I will just start with some poems. The canoe my grandmother gave me. When my grandmother hit the record button on the cassette player, it startled my great aunt. What is it? What does it do? It's going to capture the language, my grandmother said, to keep it. My great aunt thought about this for a long while. When she was a child, my great aunt traveled by river, by inland waters to relatives, to bring them fish, to carry the news. She looked down at the cassette recorder and nodded. Ah, she said, this is just a different kind of canoe. The last time we would eat together, we sat by a picture window overlooking the channel. She pushed fried oysters around her plate, Chardonnay pooling on white linen. At 6, I licked frosting, bone white from China. My mother, embarrassed, reached for the plate. My grandmother slapped her hand away. Just let her enjoy it. And we rotated high above the city, the Space Needle spinning clouds into sugar. Now she looks over oysters, out past the docks. Remember when all of this was underwater? She points a greasy fork to the hill beyond the bridge. They kept the dead up there before they came and built a church. I see canoes high above a white chapel in branches of trees no longer there. Speeding along asphalt, along LaConner Whitney Road, the backseat sticky with whiskey, the smell of cow shit, of cut grass, I look out at the snaking body of water contained, curling and flexing to keep up. It was all underwater, she'd say, until they came and built dikes and farmhouses, planted fields just for tulips, stretching lakes of daffodils. With my head against glass, bottle of whiskey in my lap, I squint until the channel breaks free, until the roads are water again. When I woke to find him there, breathing heavy, blonde, 210 pounds of quarterback of animated Coors Light above me, I learned to sever head from heart, dunked my head beneath water that was no longer there, to drown again and again, to breathe in river silt and mud, count silver scales of fish and all the white pebbles rushing past. We learned to say, I just let it happen. We learned to use words in forgotten languages. I learned to hold my breath beneath the currents, unaware of the boat on the riverbank waiting there. And this next one is called Redwoods. I told myself I'd never write a poem about the redwoods because it's been done, because I've made this trip twice now with people I have loved. And what's left to say about old wood? I told you I'd be okay as I left you curbside in San Francisco, drove away to a sad 90s playlist, not crying along to the music, but in my best riot girl kind of way. At least I had to make a fire after a 5-hour drive, had to watch my sad vegan hot dogs as they blistered into something unnatural in the flames. I am tired of writing about old things, like grandmothers and languages that are dying, and these trees, big and mythic, too old to give a shit about what is happening in the cities, bodies gunned down in the streets, pandemics, police brutality, and this old growth just towering, like, we told you so, like, you didn't see this was coming? Further north and further from you, I swim in rivers and lakes. Outside of Arcata, I already miss California, hot sand and sex and your face when it is still sleeping. Through Newport, through Brookings, I am drumming my fingers on the steering wheel, singing along with Janet and Bikini Kill. If I was your girl, all the things I'd do to you. Pull off in a town that smells of cow shit and seagrass, ignore the Trump signs, forget that I'm not allowed to pump my own gas. Make you call out my name and ask who it belongs to. You asked me to move in with you, and that's big, like Haystack Rock, like drive-in movie theaters, their parking lots all painted and abandoned. And I am considering this because I miss San Diego, miss your blonde hair, warm pavement, and bomb pops melting over my fingers, blue and sticky like when I was a kid. How is it I have never dated someone who is also Coast Salish, or at least Indigenous? Instead, it's Disney's Pocahontas, her animated dad with his hands up, these white men are dangerous, and I come running. Maybe it's time I slept with someone who understands me traditionally, who shares my spirit dreams. But you have your van and that California tan, and you have kickflips and ollies, and I am a sucker for you when you come home from surfing, limping because of a stingray. Today, I am in Astoria, and the trees are different here. The sea is cold and gray like it is supposed to be, and they say where you're from never leaves your body. This land is in my blood, and it likes to remind me, you think I forgot? Motherfucker, you redwoods are a rude awakening. I pass the places that mark me Indian, the signs that point me to the reservation, Dead Man's Cove and the Pioneer museum, trailer homes like bones, and seals you can feed like dogs. You want me to move in with you, and I am looking at the succulents on the dash, plucked from your yard and jammed into a makeshift planter that once housed LaCroix cans, wilted and thirsty for sun, a sweet memento, but I hate how we've displaced them. I am in love with a white boy from California, an artist, a skateboarder, a beautiful colonizer who brings me coffee every morning, who grew up sun swimming, who knows how to hold me when I black out during intimacy because I have forgotten for a moment that I am safe. And if I am to relocate, I will remember to stop at these trees, will hit the steering wheel hard and singing because I will never be done writing about old things. And I will just read one more. And this one is called Teach Me to Say I Love You. Teach me to say I love you in your language. I have forgotten how to speak, like something caught in my throat, a fishbone broken, splintering me into something quiet. Muted and star-like, lost in a sky. The word for sky is Shipolguets. Teach me to say, just stay put, stay here, because I have forgotten how to be inside my own body, whatever my body has become beneath your tongue, conquered and ugly, malformed and mispronounced. Teach me a word better than survivor, like watching my grandmother pour black coffee in the kitchen and the stacks of legal pads filled up with her words, and I tried to listen. The word for language is Gwidgwated. Teach me to say I love you, because every time I walk into a restaurant to meet a date, I hesitate. I remember the trees along Portland Avenue in their red bows, like gift packages on Christmas morning. This is to honor assault survivors. How my mother tied each one, hugging their bark in ribbon. And I think of this as he pulls the chair out, takes my jacket and pours the wine red into the glass and asks if I am hungry. Red is what I remember when I think of how he will have to take me home and learn how to unwrap me. Teach me to say I love you, because what good is a ribbon if it cannot hold us together where we have been broken? Teach me to speak in a language older than words, specifically the words of white men whose tongues touch everything. Quiet yourself and listen. Oh, shabitsi chud. Oh, shabitsi chud. Like a sigh I would make as a child, comfortable and safe, then the thud of my heart as it beats in my chest, its thrum as it drums inside my rib cage. Thank you.
Thank you. That was amazing. Beautiful. I can't wait to talk to you about these poems. And next we have Iona Winter, who's gonna do a reading for us. Iona? I'm excited to hear your work today.
Kia ora. E ka iwi, e ka karakataka, te iti me te rahi, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou, tēnā koutou katoa. I'm going to read a couple of pieces from my latest book, Gaps in the Light. The first one is called More Ancient Than Any of Us. Birds swoop over the whenua. Reminders of you alight upon puku and manawa, and nighttime channels thoughts unspoken in daylight. Lit fires smoulder upon open ground more ancient than any of us. Desire grew in the air between us. Braided awa beneath rako limbs came crashing earthward into landscapes of enlivened senses. The gifts inside their ringed stumps spoke of ages and shadow tones, and graced our faces with crossed lattices. Streams of consciousness, like gaps in the light. Promises leaked from your eyes. They landed upon my soul, etching deep chasms of aroha before that mamae of yours disrupted the course and an undertow began to tear at the fabric of us, casting me out. My ringa spread wide to expose secrets, and you owned none of the lies that spilled over to lap at my feet, where pureri hua wings stroked my winnowed heart, beating fast to the rhythm of our mother. Streams of consciousness, like gaps in the light. Birdsong emerged between Po and Ra to illuminate all the unnoticed seasons. But who can say whether we shifted and morphed with it or remained stagnant puzzles of links scattered from root to tip, our enacted patterns alive. Wind blows the tussocks in this unfamiliar place, yet the longing for you dissipates with each luminous marama cycle and recounts tidal surges in existence long before you left. And the kakahu always enfolds me, certain I will awake unbroken. This next one is called Maniatoto. Plain of blood and Scottish settlers, where winds rip through fields of foreign black-faced sheep and mechanical arms stretch across acres. But their water comes from somewhere deep inside our mother, already keening and fierce in her rock falls and floods. I feel my bare feet on her dusty earth amongst tussock, reunited with tupuna. But I don't hear the old songs, sense only their footfalls over paths between Mauka and Moana. Unadorned feet like mine know how to leave behind one season for another. They would not recognize you, Maniatoto, the whenua infinitely disturbed, like the place in me that is deeper than sorrow. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you.
Wow, that was beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing your work, both of you. I'm just really honored and excited to be asked to moderate this event and to participate with you today. This work that we do and this work here is important, and I'm happy that this platform exists for us today. So I'll share two poems, shortish poems, and then we'll start our conversation. So Ait squire nostalgia o helixen quenas natacha latiakaias the hueltanats and a snatch of chlamisen. I'll go ahead and start my reading. This first poem that I'll share is it's a new poem, and it's called Resonance, and it addresses the topic of Ait Hutchning, which is Lummi for good feelings, but it means more than that. It's when your heart and your mind are in resonance. That is when you can be in resonance with things around you, with people and the things around you. And so that feels good. So it has an epigraph. All things were together, the mind came and arranged them. Anaxagoras. The flicker of a wave on the sea is a flame, not like a candle on a cake, keeping tally of our days. Instead, the fire measures life together by the sweetness of resonance. How, exalted by the dawn, we as one have sung our true song, become a single voice across the waves. The wax of a candle begins inside the humming darkness of a hive, but before that it begins as sunlight, calling forth blossoms, pollen, and bees, bees who play matchmaker to trees, calling forth fruit to become new seeds. Where does love begin? It is a surprise, but obvious and easy, like breathing. It has been there all along, a flicker on the sea that swam up from the deep to touch air and light, to shine like fire, leap from its element the way a tree becomes a boat so the earth can leap into the sea and sail toward adventure. Things are changed, things transform. This is the way the mind arranged it. The mind comes and arranges, the heart draws it all back toward union, washes away the illusion of separateness, gives new measures for happiness, a new way to celebrate the state of being of one heart and one mind. Ait Hutchning. Our song is a ferry that joins two shores. And this next poem is a little bit about my journey to learn the language. It's called A Poem is a Naming Ceremony. What has grown out of what has gone away? The clear-cut patch has grown larger on the mountain. The rivers have grown murky with timber trash, and there's enough runoff manure to grow corn out there on the tide flats. I don't want to think about what has gone away. I want to meander and play and forget myself until I can grow a new me in place of all this grief. Learn the language to see the cottonwood as Quayalich each, the dancing tree, the killer whales as Quilhamachan, our relatives under the sea, the whole glorious landscape filled with meaning to end my grieving. When I was young, I was invited to learn Quilnuhkin, the people's language, but I said no. I didn't understand. I thought I wanted to learn to be rich. I didn't know that the only way to possess all the wealth of the world is by naming it. Here is bird song, here is the kiss of a lover, here is the feel of cold water at the peak of summer. I have spent my life with words trying to name a hint of what I lost by not learning my language. Estitimsin, tutatissin, estitimsin. And so now we'll begin with the discussion part of today's offering. So first, I think that I'd just like to ask about your most recent projects. You have Gaps in Light, Iona, and Sasha, your forthcoming book from Milkweed that you read from. It's called Rose Quartz. Yeah. So talk a little bit about what the process was of writing those, and kind of what your hopes are for those as they come out into the world.
Do you want me to start?
Sure. Whoever, just dive right in.
Rose Quartz and as well as the memoir Red Paint, I think my process around writing has been, honestly, also, I just need to say, wow, what beautiful work from both of you. I'm still just kind of reeling, like, how can I snap back into it? That was so gorgeous. Thank you both for your beautiful, beautiful words. Definitely got emotional in there, hearing the language, and so beautiful. Thank you. For me, my writing process, when I was still in my MFA program, I had started this project of writing a memoir about what it was like to grow up on the reservation, what it was like to survive you know, sexual assault, and like it was a really hard book project that I took on. And I finished it and I did it and ended up scrapping the whole manuscript. But throughout that process, I really unearthed a lot of hard things for myself, PTSD. Throughout that writing process, I sort of became unraveled in this way that was incredibly intense. And when I came to poetry, when I came to Rose Quartz, I sort of, and also with red paint, but I sort of went back to, I think it took getting to a place of just being undone by like unearthing these hard memories, like generational trauma, memories of like lived abuse, and also like the historical memory of abuse that I think lives in us as Native people. I took a big break from that and came to poetry and kind of remembered what it was like growing up with my great grandmother and her language work. And that was really like a sort of grounding place for me to arrive at. And I think that when you're young and you grow up with like the language around you and stories around you, it's almost like I had not known how lucky I was to have that. And when I was in a state of just really, really hard, sort of triggered PTSD, I went back to those stories, the stories I heard from my grandmother growing up, just remembering the language. And I think when you are young, you think that something like that will be around forever, right? And when she passed and my family lost her, it was kind of like, oh, like how can I get back there? And so just revisiting her stories and listening to her many recordings speaking in our language, I started the process of writing these new books. And in that, I found healing. And I think growing up, learning that our stories are lessons, our songs are healing. I really like found that, and poetry, like the Rose Quartz collection, is all about that. And I started experimenting with learning my language as an adult, which is so hard. Like, which I'm sure like we could talk forever about.
So hard.
So many conversations with my mom, like, can you teach me how to say this phrase? You know, and being a woman in my 30s, it's like really hard to learn that stuff. But the act of it was very healing and very brought me back to like growing up with it around me. And I think trying to incorporate a little bit of Lushootseed words into my work is really challenging, but also so powerful. Like there have been times where I've shown up at a reading and I look out and I see very fluent speakers and I see elders and I'm like, oh, I can't do it. I can't say it. I'm going to say it wrong. And I push myself and I do it. And like, I think one of the first times I shared that poem, Teach Me to Say I Love You, was at an Indigenous Women's Day reading. And I looked out and I saw these elders and I was like, oh, I should change the poem. I'm not going to read this. And I just powered through and did it. And afterwards, one of the elders came up to me and thanked me for speaking beautifully. And like that reminded me of like the work that I think my grandmother would have wanted me to do as her namesake. And I think that both with Rose Quartz and the memoir, I'm trying to like do that. And it's my hope that when they come out into the world, that is apparent, and that it's like as a grown-up trying to learn her traditional language, like just the power that holds. I kind of rambled, I'm sorry, but that's what my process around writing.
Oh, that was perfect. That was so thank you so much for all of that. That was beautiful. Yeah. And also for how you well, I'll let's hear from Iona and then we'll carry on the conversation.
I feel like I want to riff off what you said, really, Sasha, around that kind of, I don't know. I've been sitting with the notion of just being displaced, and I think probably all my life have known that sense of intergenerational trauma and shame and indigeneity being hidden, particularly in our whānau, in our family. And I could tell you a million stories about that, but I think for me, my latest collection, Gaps in the Light, I'd been working on a bigger, like a hybrid, do you know flash fiction over there? I don't know if you do, but it's really short form fiction. So I'd been working on a hybrid novella and flash fiction, and it just wasn't coming together. And I was like, oh, I've had a whole lot of other stuff published. Why don't I do a collection? And then a whole lot of new stuff came. And it all just, it's quite bittersweet to talk about it, but I finished it all. It was quite a drive in me, and I've always been someone who listens to my tupuna, my ancestors, and feel like they're quite close with me all the time. The morning I finished the manuscript, I learned that afternoon that my son had taken his life, and so getting that book out in the world was quite a big process, because he was a really prolific musician here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and he had a lot of unfinished, well, finished actually, but not out in the world, albums. So as it turned out, earlier this year, we toured his latest album and my book at the same time, which was kind of cool. I was band mum for about a decade with him and his friends, and so bittersweet. But I've always talked about hard stuff, maybe because I worked as a therapist for some time, and I've done a lot of my own work, and that notion of intergenerational trauma, but also trauma on those of us who've experienced, be that sexual, family violence, interpersonal violence. I mean, violence is a big thing, isn't it? It's everywhere. And so I talk about that stuff. I talk about suicide, and Ruben was the third mokopuna, so the third grandchild in our family in 2 years to take his life. So it's a really big deal for me, and it's a very big problem here in New Zealand. I'm not sure about where you are, but it's massive for Indigenous populations. Yeah, I'm also rambling, but using the language is important to me. I grew up with a grandfather who was fluent. However, it was my grandmother who was Indigenous, so he knew the language and she hid it. So it's been a process of, I guess, not reclaiming it, because there are a lot of things that I grew up with, but certainly there are words in Māori that mean so much more than English. So they seem to come quite organically when I'm writing. And I've never been attached to labels, really. So what I write is what I write. It might be a story, it might be a flash fiction, it might be a poem, it might be an essay. Yeah, quite intuitive, I think, my process. And I put that down to my connection with the land, my connection with my ancestors, and all it is.
Yeah, so putting it together, I like this line in your work. Actually, there's a line from each of your poems that caught my ear. Iona, you say streams of consciousness like gaps in the light. And I just love how that makes me think about how, in the absence of thinking, we're light, right? Like, am I interpreting it correctly? Like we're just light, and then we think, and it's a gap in the light, right? So I love that. And then Sasha, you in the first poem that you read, The Canoe My Grandmother Gave Me, you say, you talk about how the moment of the trauma, it was all underwater, sever head from heart. And the historical trauma and the personal traumas that we survive, that's what it does. It just severs that connection, like, I don't have to feel this, and maybe not even think about it. And how contrary that is to that concept that I don't know if it's in the shoot seed or in your tribal language, Iona, but the concept of Ait Hutchning. I know that the Canadian tribes call it like Ait Schwallowen, the connection between head and heart being good feelings, or like in resonance with everything around you. And then just kind of like how the language that we have that in the language, and there's all these other things in the language that do that. They connect the head to the heart to everything else around us, right? And so that's like where the value is. And to be able to connect that in poetry and in writing is just so beautiful too. I've enjoyed hearing how that has been, you know, how that shows up in your work. Do you when you are writing, do you feel like there's the thing that you want to write, but then do you ever feel like there's the thing, you mentioned the ancestors that are behind you, and then also your line, Sasha, I'm tired of writing about old things. And then you finish the poem and you say, you say, because I will never be done writing about old things. Do you ever feel like this pressure from, either your just outside or your own consciousness to write about old things, and wish that you could just like, kind of talk about that a little bit? I mean, obviously you do because it's in your poem, but yeah, I want to hear both of you kind of talk through how you kind of work with that.
This is actually a very exciting question for me, so thank you. That specifically because of my experience with that poem, like the Redwoods, is a perfect example of what you're talking about, where it's like the pressure or the way it just sort of steers you into something. So I thought about this poem, The Redwoods, in kind of like for lack of a better way to say it, like kind of bratty. Like I've been in conversation with some other my dear friends, like Indigenous artists, a filmmaker, a jewelry maker, and we're kind of talking about how we're always expected to write about these certain things, right? In like the white literary world, it's like, yeah, but can you talk more about salmon and your grandma? And I was kind of like, no, we'll talk about all kinds, So when I was like I was on like an 8-day solo drive up the coast. I had just left my partner in California, and me and my dog drove up the coast and camped every night. And it was really a beautiful experience. But I went into it with this, like, I'm not going to write a nature poem. I'm not going to write like the native poem. I'm going to write about just like camping and being on my own. And every night I would set up camp, I'd build a fire, and I'd take out my journal and I'd start writing. And so it started as this kind of defiant poem about like, well, I don't have to fit into this mold. But then as the nights went on and I kept writing, and the further north I got, it started about, oh, I miss my partner, what am I going to do? But then the further north I got, it's sort of like, it just became this other thing. And I was like, oh, the poem won, like I felt like my grandmother's presence. I felt like that, like ancestral guidance. And I was like, even when I want to be like this, like, I'm going to write about punk and like other stuff. And then at the end of it was so funny to see it transform like that. And I finished it like in Astoria, where a place I visit often. One of my ancestors, I've done a lot of research there about her and her life. And I was camping and I ended up adding a whole nother night. I was like, I know I'm only like 4 hours away from home, but I'm going to go ahead and add another night. And I finished that poem and just kind of felt, oh, this is what it was supposed to be. So there was that pressure of like, and I don't know if pressure is the right word. It was more of like guidance, where I was like, I'm not going to talk about this. And it was like, oh no, you still need. And so when it comes to that ending line, I will never be done writing about old things, I literally had this experience of learning something about myself and being like, it's okay, you can keep doing that. So that is my long rambly answer to your question.
That's perfect. Thank you. And how about you, Iona, when you say that you feel when your ancestors are with you in the writing, how interacting with sort of where you think the writing is going versus where it ends up taking you. Talk about that a little bit.
We have a whakatauki, or a proverb, which loosely translated means, you know, you face into the future, or you look towards the future, or you head towards the future while looking to the past. So it's that notion of our pasts are always with us, eh? And here and now, for me, I only have this moment, you know, but I am fully informed by what's happened before. This is a funny question, but what's not funny? I'm always cautious about how I answer, because, you know, I might come across as being a bit flaky. For me, my writing process is, I think I said before, really intuitive. And sometimes for me, being in nature all the time is awesome. And that's when I feel most connected to everything. And sometimes when I go for a walk, I'll get a download of a poem. So I'll write it down on my phone, or if I've got a notebook with me, I'll write it down. And sometimes they come fully formed, and I don't think that's necessarily my voice, if that makes sense. I think that's all of those people before me saying, hey, we've got this stuff that we need you to say. There's quite a lot of people in Aotearoa who are writing about indigeneity and historical stuff. And I know that I've written a lot about historical stuff in all of my writing. And I don't think we're ever done talking about it, you know, because whether we have children or not, there are other generations that will come that need to know this stuff. Yeah. And even in New Zealand, we're only just looking to change the school curriculum where we teach the actual history of what happened to Indigenous people here. Taken a bloody long time, excuse my language, but you know, it's really frustrating. And I don't want to be one of those people who stand up and says, rah, rah, rah. I think I've found a way, I've found my voice, I think, in terms of how I write, and it is very much informed by the past, and it is very much informed by what comes through me sometimes. I think I just see myself as a bit of a conduit, really. Yeah. Hope that didn't sound too flaky.
No, not at all. It rang true to me. Yeah, real true. I think of this, there was this poet, Ruth Stone. She said that sometimes she'll be out living her life, and the poem will come, and she'll try to grab it by the tail and write it, you know, like the way she visualized it as these things that are like flying across the landscape, and you get one, sometimes you catch one. I think that's cool. Kind of sounded like a little bit of what you're talking about. But, and then also, oh gosh, is it William Burroughs? I read The Adding Machine, and he talks about how every voice that has ever been, like all the words and sounds that have ever been made, are still kind of bouncing around the atmosphere. They have no way to leave. And so it's all just up there. And I was like, wow. So, you know, sometimes they bounce back, and we can have one of the, maybe that's where poems come from. Who knows? It's just,
I like that idea. I like that idea.
Yeah. Yeah. And then if you're in your homelands, you can be the conduit for those voices. Yeah. And also in our DNA, right? It's there still encoded in us. Yeah, super fascinating. Yeah, you look like you have something, Sasha.
Oh no, I'm just like enjoying this conversation, and yeah, thinking about the way things are encoded in us, and I'm just like sitting here riffing on like, oh yeah, definitely, like just to go back to what it was like to be away from like Coast Salish lands for several months when I was like kind of hanging out with a partner down in California, and how I feel like things kind of went quiet a little bit in this weird way, like not writer's block, but I was just like, huh. And like I loved it down there. It's beautiful. It's sunny. It's California. But when like the further north I got, and then those things like the poems, how they just kind of appear like that, got louder, and I was like, oh, like I'm just basically just nodding and agreeing with you and being like, yep, That's real.
Cool. So talking about the hard stuff, like writing about the hard stuff, do you feel like that is an act of healing? Um, yeah, I suppose just that. Is it something that, you feel like you're just kind of exercising the feelings out onto the page? Or is it like a dialogue with yourself to kind of, see what you're thinking? This is when I write hard stuff. I write it and I see and I think, huh, okay. And then, I can respond to it in a way that feels more whole, I suppose. Yeah.
I think that to answer your question, like when you're writing about the hard stuff, which is something I always do, I feel like I warn my like friends and loved ones when they come to my dad still won't come to my readings, and I don't like blame him for that. It's too hard for him. Like I feel like I always have a disclaimer, like this is a harsh toke, like for lack of a better, this is going to be a bummer. I don't know. So I'm often sort of deep diving into these hard topics, hard memories. And I think that it absolutely can be an act of healing, but as someone who, just recently within the past few years experienced, like I mentioned that manuscript I wrote in my MFA program, where I was like, I'm going to write this story because I had every intention that it would be healing. But in the act of doing it, it wasn't. So I think that it can be when, like, I just had to stop and listen and be like, listen to, my, like, that ancestral knowledge, and like the first go through, like my first draft of that memoir really unearthed some things, and I wasn't prepared for that. So whether you're writing poetry or memoir or hybrid, I love hybrid and lyric essay and flash fiction. I love that you even brought that up. I'm like, I love tiny stories. Whatever you're doing, if you're bringing up and like exploring your own like pain and trauma, like if you're not prepared for it, which I super wasn't, it wasn't healing. It was so destructive. It was the opposite of healing. And I was young and still in my grad program and didn't realize what I had just done to myself, excavating some of those memories. And I was like, that was a train wreck, right? But a year later, when I started on the poems in rose quartz and I started on red paint, that's when the healing happened. So I think that it can be, and it is like so healing, but I guess with the right, I don't know how to say
I know
that.
what you're saying. Yeah, I totally get it. I had a residency once where I was going to write a memoir, and I would start, and then it was like, what am I doing? And then I started like really kind of hating the whole process of writing altogether. Because when you're at a residency and you're like alone with your words and your thoughts in this project, and it's so daunting. And then so I'd be like, whatever, I'm going to write these poems. And my whole second collection kind of came out of like avoiding writing about the hard stuff, because you can like really wound yourself. And I feel like the expectation that, the feeling like, well, we have these obligations to tell our stories and things like that. It's like, well, yeah, okay, but in our own time, right? Like in my own time, and let's just not do that to writers about what they should be writing. Like I read your interview about the mentioning the woman who wanted more details about, a particularly traumatic event, and you're just like, can we just let that live in like in the shadows, like, yeah. And then it's powerful too. I read something recently. I've been thinking about trying to write horror, and the guy's essay, Benjamin Percy, he says that a lot of the masters of horror will let the really awful thing like happen off camera so that it lives in the imagination of the reader, because then that it can be just like way more what it is, I guess. Flannery O'Connor, he uses her as an example for like all of the terrible violence happens sort of off camera, but it's happening. So
Yeah.
craft wise, that can be a thing too, right? Not saying it.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important thing to like I felt really not prepared for that kind of feedback, and I had it through different professors, folks who were like different editors, people who were reading the work, and I wasn't prepared for them to be like, you go into this weird dreamlike state in this moment of a hard memory of a very traumatic event. Why are you talking about whales now? And I was like, why wouldn't I be talking about whales? What do you mean? What? And they were like, can you spell it out more concretely? We need to see it. And I was just like, what is wrong with you? Like, no. And like now I feel a bit more like, you know, I have wiser now, but I tried, like I took editors and professors' advice and was like, okay, I'm gonna write it out and spell it out. And that felt so wrong for the writing process when you're dealing with such delicate stuff. And I think that that line that you brought up earlier in my poetry, like about dunking my head beneath water, like severing head from heart, is also like me sort of addressing disassociation and what can happen to us in our most like fight or flight survival modes. And I'm angry at, like, not angry, but you know, I'm kind of like those professors and those mentors who were telling me to spell it out more. I'm like, you should not have been telling me to do that. Like, I think that there's an important process about writing about these things and not going into gratuitous detail.
Yeah, totally.
I think that sort of raises the this voyeuristic kind of quality often of an audience, you know, they want to know more because it's to feed them, right? It's not, yeah. And I think writing that I read, and maybe this is what I try to do too, is like leave some of it up to the reader, because my experience is going to be different to somebody else's, and I don't have to spell it out. I too have had other people want me to give more detail, you know. It's like, what planet are you on? Like, seriously, it's really clear. I don't need to tell you anymore.
Yeah.
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 That voyeuristic, that hits it right on the head in my experience. That's how it feels to me when, because I've been asked, why don't you write about, you know, and I'm like, well, because. And then, and it does feel like not honest in some ways. And some of the work that I'm doing right now, it feels a little bit like watered down, and I'm writing about nature and I'm writing about grandmothers and you know, and the old me would have been just like, oh, Rena. But now I feel also being home again in my community, and then in a place where I feel like I crossed some kind of threshold of 40 or something, and I don't know, just feeling kind of nostalgia for all, like you say, like the things you know that you thought would be there forever when you were a child, and that now they're not. And so my heart's kind of reaching out for those things in my writing, where before I felt like, well, those are mine, I'm going to keep those, and I'm not going to let, you know, that be with the audience or whatever. It's yeah, it's such a personal thing what we choose to write about, or like what comes out of the writing, even just beyond our own choosing. Right, because in some ways it's like a co-creation. Yeah.
Conversely, for me, I think as I've gotten older, not to be ageist, but certainly in terms of, I feel like now, particularly, or perhaps in my writing, I kind of have a duty to name things, particularly around the hard stuff, because I don't know about, you know, I've never been to the States, you know, so I only know what my son told me from the times he toured there and other people. But certainly here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, there's a real silencing that goes on around difficult stuff, and there's a real, it's quite a lot of avoidance, you know, and I think, I know for myself, my next project it's already started, is going to be around voicing suicide, because there's so much of it and it affects people, and many of us have been to that edge, many of us have walked those lines, many of us know people who have suicided. So I know just through feedback, you know, often feedback, you get a lot of feedback that's like, oh, that's really nice. But some of the harder feedback for me has been that people have found it really useful, that I've been able to put into words stuff that they can't. And, you know, that's a privilege for me to be able to do that. And I think as I've gotten older, but particularly since Ruben died, because he's my only child, I feel like I have a responsibility to the generations that are coming after me to say, I'm not shying away from this stuff. I'm not going to be quiet about this stuff because this is affecting you. What sort of a world have you guys inherited, you know? So I'm starting to shake as I'm talking about it, so it's probably an indication that I need to do it right. It just feels really important to me to do this. Yeah.
It's so important. I'm so glad that you know that you are answering that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that there's like oftentimes like what you're saying about silence and like almost like a stigma or something that exists around like not talking about that hard stuff and like mental health stuff and suicide stuff. Like even in my own experience, writing memoir, writing like my experiences, I sort of wrestled with this moment where I didn't know if I wanted to put it in the book because it was something that I had learned through my mom telling me stories. And, you know, our grandmother was like the, you know, matriarch, the of our family, like this, always like so strong, like a tank of a woman in such a beautiful way. And my mom shared with me a story about a time where when she was young and going through a really dark period, actually like wrestled with suicidal thoughts. And that kind of blew my mind because it was like, no, grandma was grandma. Like, no, she was the strongest woman I know. But I think that for me, having to unpack that process of like, the strongest woman you know can still wrestle with that, and that's okay. And why wouldn't I share that and be honest with it? But it just speaks to that silence you're talking about, that like initial like, oh, I shouldn't say that in the book because I shouldn't like let that be known. But then it was like, no, this stories like that do need to be shared. And I just feel like it's so important.
Mm-hmm.
So is there, as we kind of draw to a close today, is there anything about your work or about your writing and your process that you feel is important to share, or maybe if you have a question for each other or for me, we can do that also.
I might start this round. First off, I just want to thank you all for being here and being available and being willing, and for the openness and the honesty. Like, I just really appreciate it. And listening to your kupu, your words, you know, how that resonance, how that shared experience as wahine or woman who identify, or people who identify as female, just, you know, how words just they cover time and space, yeah, and it is all around us. And I just love it when I get together with other people and we're like, yeah, you know, we're all vibing in the same way. It's beautiful. So I just want to say big kia ora and thank you so much. And I think for me, is just to sort of wind up, I'm really aware that there's a lot of people who can't access a written word. And so it's become more important for me to find other ways to get my words out in the world. So I'm more and more interested about doing multimedia stuff and I have someone who's taken the words that I spray painted on a fence. They've taken that and they're splicing it up, and they're doing some kind of choir thing where sound is responding to the words. I just think that's amazing.
That's
And how many
awesome.
more people, how many more people can access that? And I had a poem made into a dance recently for National Flash Fiction Day. It was so amazing to just see how other people were responding to the work. So I think that's something I'm really passionate about too. I try and do podcasts as often as I can so that people who can't read the written word so well are able to listen. So that's probably enough from me.
I love that. I love that. And I hope that you'll come to the United States and visit us sometime. I would love to have us do a reading here in the Seattle City of Literature together. That would be amazing.
Oh, yeah, be beautiful.
Yeah.
I absolutely agree with that. Like, just being in this virtual space with you all today has been so beautiful and amazing. And like, I feel like I'm gonna ramble and I'm gonna try not to. But just being in a room with folks who I feel like almost kindred spirit with, like talking about hard things, talking about where poems or these things come from. Sometimes it can feel kind of alienating when you're with folks that don't understand the process or like tackle the hard things. And so this is always so like, just, it feels like nourishment for me. So I second that. I hope that we can all be somewhere in real life and real space together. I would feel so honored to like read alongside you guys. Like, this has been beautiful, and I feel so endlessly grateful.
Yeah, I echo both of what you've said, or all of what both of you have said. It's always just really nice to be in conversation with people whose work you resonate with, and who have similar life experiences, and have written about them bravely and with courage and a beautiful, fierce, amazing voice. So thank you both so much for your work and for sharing your words today. And it's just been amazing. It's been wonderful. Haishkasiya Ministracha.
Ka kite.
Thank you all so much. This has been such an amazing conversation, and it's such a pleasure to hear all of your beautiful words and get to be a fly on the wall while you all chat. So thank you so much for that. And so if folks watching are interested in finding out more about Sasha, Iona, or Rena's work, we're going to put links to their books and their websites in the show description below. So you'll be able to find out more and click to buy copies. We want to thank our partners at Dunedin, UNESCO City of Literature, and of course, we're grateful to the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture, the Amazon Literary Partnership, and Seattle University for their support of tonight's program. And of course, thanks to all of you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Have a good night.
Thank you, Sasha.